Hello, I'm Gavin, and this is Genre Books, and this video is a deep dive of issue 3 of Planet Stories from the summer of 1940. Issue 3 consists of 1 novel, 4 novelettes, and 3 short stories, as well as a brief essay and an increasing fan page. As I was putting together the notes for this video, I did notice that the furthest we get away from Earth in this issue is Pluto. So in 1940, Pluto had only been part of anyone's consciousness for 10 years. But that we don't escape the solar system in this issue, and the vast majority of the stories in Planet Stories, and generally in the science fiction of the 30s, 40s, and to some extent the 50s as well, lends an idea of a certain parochialism in old science fiction. And I did start to think about why that might be. I don't think it's any failure of imagination. I think it's just that the solar system was a much more mysterious place than it is to us now. The comparatively limited scientific knowledge, or just raw data that we have at our disposal now, was something that the writers of the 30s, 40s, 50s just didn't have. There's no direct experience of any kind of space flight before Gagarin. It's not until 1969 that we can say for certain that the moon's not made of cheese. There are no probes, there are no super powerful telescopes. There's certainly no proof of exoplanets, so they just made do with the planets that we did know about. The writers need something to project their imagination onto, and as we think at this point in 1940 that there still might be life on Mars, it's as good a place as any to populate it with the races that you have imagined. It doesn't hurt that there's been proven commercial success with Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom. It wasn't just pulp writers who were thinking this. C.S. Lewis takes us on a voyage to Venus. He's no pulp writer. Other science fiction writers, including some in this issue, make do with what they've got right here on Earth, sending us forwards in time, sending us shrinking in size to microscopic entities. A solar system where we're not sure whether you can land on Saturn at this point, where we haven't discovered all the moons of the planets of our own solar system, allows us to write alternative societies, alternative histories, and using those planets and moons as that canvas. For some people, I think this is a stick to beat. This golden age science fiction, with its ignorance of the reality of the situation, means that it's never rigorously scientific enough. You certainly wouldn't last long on the surface of Mars without a helmet these days, as Arnold Schwarzenegger has proven to us. But as you may have guessed, I've got more of a fondness for this period of science fiction, and I do question sometimes why that is, but I think it is because of that, perhaps you would call it naivete, because of what I prefer to think of it as exercising that imagination on planets just using the ones that they have to hand. I think in short it's nice to think that there was a time when we still dreamt of life on our neighbouring planets, rather than pinning our hopes on ones that we'll never attain in any of our lifetimes. But what stories fill the pages of issue 3 of Planet Stories? The main novel is Spaceliner X-87 by Ray Cummings, more of whom later. In this story, Fred Pennell of the Shadow Squad is called in to investigate corporate espionage and infighting, and he goes undercover on an interplanetary passenger trip, I believe his first, and he is joined on board by a mix of Martians, Venusians, and other Earthmen, as he looks to protect the heiress of a large lunar corporation. But how much protection does the heiress need? And amongst the other passengers, where does the danger lie? It's pure ship-bound adventure with some grisly deaths. In Sphere of the Never Dead by Sam Carson, we're snatched away to the future with Bob and Jim, who are effectively coshed on the sidewalk and wake up many, many years in the future. They are welcome to a new Earth, but what do the three who control this new society want with men from 1940? One has brains, one has brawn, but surely in the future they have brains enough of their own. But do they have the right kind? It's an entertaining yarn. I don't think it expands the genre remarkably, but it gives a lively account of itself. The Forbidden Dream by Rocklynne does introduce some novel ideas. Here our hero is Sid. He's a scientist, and he has been selected to infiltrate the xenophobic world of Ganymede. This is done in order to avoid a war between Earth and Jupiter, but to visit Ganymede he can't go as himself. His body would be crushed by the pressure. He would not be able to breathe the atmosphere. He has to swap brains with a native of Ganymede, and he must do this at the Bureau of Transmitted Egos. But first he has to erase all scientific knowledge from his own head, because if the Bureau on Ganymede discovers that he's a scientist, they will suspect that he is out to take the secrets that he's looking to gather. So the scientist erases all scientific knowledge from their head, and he's got to arrive on Ganymede knowing that he's got to get the knowledge, but without any idea of what that knowledge means. And I think it might be my favourite from this issue. In Exiles of the Three Red Moons by Carl Selwyn, we are following Rusty Carter, who is an undercover journalist sent to unearth the terrible conditions of a prison on Pluto, when he finds himself stranded and imprisoned there for real, along with fellow inmates, a Martian, a Venusian, a Uranian and a Vulcanian. He plans his escape and attempts to clear his name. Star Pirate by Frederick Arnold Kummer Jr. is essentially a western in space. Steve McLean and his Uncle John have been mining on Ceres ever since they'd been betrayed by Steve's father, Vance. And now, shortly before their time mining on the asteroid is up, Vance returns. There are some neat twists in this story and a nice frontier feel. In The Cosmic Juggernaut by John Russell Fearn, a wandering planet invades our solar system. Its ruler, who isn't a villain, but certainly has ideas above his station, almost tries to play God, but does so in an effort to save his people. But things go awry, and it turns out it may not be his own people that he's able to save. It's an interesting but completely batty story, but it's the only one of the issue that does at least conceive of life without the solar system, even if it does arrive on our doorstep. Asteroid H277 Plus by Harry Walton is a slight story, and it concerns John Akers, who has taken control of the Sunline freighter Cinnabar in an effort to rob his own ship. He believes he's incapacitated the entire crew, but is that really the case? This is enjoyable enough, but a very sort of slight story about a would-be thief and a complete Boy Scout of a hero. There is then a one-page essay by Edward Podolsky, musing on life on other planets, and you'll be surprised, in a magazine called Planet Stories, that he thinks that there will be. And the final story of this issue is The Dark Swordsman of Saturn by Neil R. Jones. This is Sword and Planet, pure and simple. It's a tale of swashbuckling interplanetary pirates and has some strong Barsoomian overtones. In some quite literal fan service, in this magazine there is a list of other fan magazines, and there are also brief profiles of a couple of the writers of the stories. And the following quote from Frederick Arnold Kummer Jr. is, I think, emblematic of the pulp sensibility. He says, "Let it be suffice to say that I have absolutely no desire to write the great American novel, that I will write anything for anybody as long as I get paid for it, that I am the crassest of crass materialists. Geniuses can let their hair grow and bemoan the fate of American letters. My only desire is to become a skilled craftsman and to turn out the kind of material that is currently in demand." How far his tongue is in his cheek when he writes this, I'm not entirely sure. Unlike issue 2, in issue 3 in the letters, the editor uses SF as an abbreviation rather than STF, which we had seen previously. There's also a letter from, at that point, 24-year-old Forest J Ackerman, the science fiction Renaissance man and the originator of the term sci-fi. Maybe he's someone we'll come back to later. And there are 3 letters from various correspondents bemoaning the Ray Cummings story from the previous issue, saying that he was relying on atom-sized people too much. To stick with Ray Cummings as the writer I want to talk a little bit about in this video, if we consider that he wrote one of his first science fiction stories, The Girl in the Golden Atom, for All Story Weekly in March of 1919, then perhaps we may think that these correspondence to the magazine may have something of a point. By 1940, his best days were past in terms of writing pulp. He could never really adapt himself to the longer form that was demanded by the emerging paperback. But by this point, he had been a writer across multiple genres of over 750 short stories, and as indicated by writing in 1919 about science fiction, he's a writer producing science fiction before the Gernsback era. If you can consider that correspondence to Planet Stories are bemoaning his lack of inventiveness, some of the concepts that he did invent or popularise in science fiction are quite astounding. In Brigands of the Moon, we have artificial gravity, dome shelters, which are a familiar design from many a science fiction show. It also has an eavesdropping ray, glassite, lunar mining and invisibility cloaks. And if you wonder where this inventive streak might come from, he has a claim to fame in that he was Thomas Edison's personal assistant and technical writer from 1914 to 1919, before he made that leap to pulps. The pulps he wrote for included Argosy, Astounding, Detective Fiction Weekly, Science and Invention, Fantastic Adventures, and Future. He wrote under the names Ray King, Emerson Graves, Ray P. Shotwell, Robert Wallace, and Gabriel Wilson. By 1940, he isn't as popular as he once was, and maybe this can be seen by the fact he is writing for a new magazine which can't pay as well as some of those he had written for previously. After Pulps, he also scripts some comics for Timely Comics, which is the immediate precursor to Marvel Comics, and penned stories for Captain America, The Human Torch, and The Submariner. His nearly 40 years of literary output contains a wealth of great stories and some great inventions along the way, and his is a name which, although still known, is certainly not very popular now, mostly because of the lack of long-form writing comparative to his short story output. But I think anyone with access to Project Gutenberg could do worse than typing in the name Ray Cummings and selecting a few stories to read. In the next video, we move on to the fall of 1940, that's autumn to you and me, and although we still have returning writers such as Nelson S. Bond, Ed Or Rep, John Russell Fearn, Neil R. Jones, Carl Selwyn and Ray Cummings, we also have our first peek at Donald A. Wollheim and Robert Moore Williams. And I think in the next video, the writer we'll be taking a closer look at is Ed Earl Rep. But until then, keep watching those canals on Mars. I don't trust them.